Hi, I'm Vera, and what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and hidden truths. Picture this. You're at your own engagement party, surrounded by everyone you love, when your aunt stands up with a champagne glass and announces her pregnancy, ending with the words that would haunt me forever. Finally, some good news. Those four words unraveled secrets that had been buried for decades, destroyed relationships I thought were unbreakable, and ultimately led to the most shocking discovery of my life. But here's the thing, sometimes the worst betrayals come from the people we trust most, and sometimes the truth is so devastating that it changes everything you thought you knew about who you are. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the coastal town of Millbrook, I always felt like I was living in someone else's shadow. My older sister Carmen was everything I wasn't: confident, beautiful, effortlessly popular. She was the golden child, the one everyone expected great things from, while I was the quiet bookworm who preferred spending time in the library rather than at social gatherings. Our parents, Elena and Marcus, owned a small but successful accounting firm downtown, and they'd always made it clear that Carmen would inherit the business someday. I was fine with that arrangement, honestly. I had my own dreams of becoming a veterinarian, inspired by our family dog Pepper, who had been my constant companion through childhood. Carmen was 7 years older than me, which meant that by the time I was in high school, she was already establishing herself in the family business, learning the ropes from our parents and proving herself to be every bit as capable as they'd hoped. She married her college sweetheart, Derek, when I was 16, in what everyone called the wedding of the century in our small town. Derek came from old money. His family owned several restaurants along the coast and had connections that stretched all the way to the state capital. Together, Carmen and Derek seemed unstoppable, the perfect power couple destined for success. The only shadow in their otherwise perfect life was their struggle to have children. They'd been trying for years, and I watched as Carmen's confidence slowly chipped away with each failed attempt, each negative pregnancy test, each doctor's appointment that ended in disappointment. Our family rallied around them, offering support and encouragement, but I could see the toll it was taking on my sister. She became more withdrawn, more focused on work, throwing herself into expanding the family business with an intensity that worried all of us. Meanwhile, I was finding my own path. After graduating from veterinary school, I started working at the Millbrook Animal Clinic under Dr. Harrison, a kind man in his 60s who had been treating animals in our town for over 30 years. It was there that I met Jake, a marine biologist who brought in injured seabirds he'd rescue from oil spills and fishing accidents. Jake was different from anyone I'd ever known, passionate about ocean conservation, gentle with animals, and possessed of a quiet strength that drew me to him immediately. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared morning coffees before work, weekend beach walks where he'd tell me about marine ecosystems, and quiet evenings at his cottage overlooking the harbor. Jake wasn't flashy or wealthy like Derek, but he had something more valuable to me: authenticity. He cared deeply about making the world better, one rescued animal at a time, and he saw something in me that I'd never seen in myself. When he proposed on the beach where we'd had our first real conversation, with Pepper sitting beside us watching the sunset, I knew I'd found my person. Our engagement brought unexpected joy to our family, especially to Carmen, who threw herself into helping plan our wedding with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She insisted on hosting our engagement party at the country club, despite my protests that Jake and I would be perfectly happy with something smaller and more casual. But Carmen wouldn't hear of it. Her little sister was getting married, and it was going to be done right. The weeks leading up to the engagement party were a whirlwind of decisions about flowers, music, catering, and guest lists. Carmen handled most of the details, consulting with me on the big decisions, but taking care of the logistics herself. I was grateful for her help, but I also noticed that she seemed to be using the party planning as a way to avoid dealing with her own struggles. She and Derek had recently started another round of fertility treatments, and the stress was showing on both of them. Our extended family was excited about the engagement, none more so than my Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister. Patricia had always been the free spirit of the family, unmarried, childless by choice, traveling the world as a freelance photographer. She'd lived in Paris, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo, sending us postcards from exotic locations and showing up unexpectedly for holidays with gifts from far-off places. At 52, she was still strikingly beautiful, with the kind of bohemian style that made her stand out in our conservative small town. Patricia had been particularly supportive of my relationship with Jake, perhaps because she recognized a fellow nonconformist in him. She'd taken dozens of photos of us over the past 2 years, capturing candid moments that somehow managed to show us exactly as we were, happy, genuine, in love. When she offered to be the unofficial photographer for our engagement party, we accepted gratefully, knowing that her artistic eye would capture the evening perfectly. The day of the party arrived with typical October weather for the coast, crisp and clear with the kind of golden light that photographers dream of. The country club had been transformed with elegant decorations in soft blues and whites, reflecting both Jake's love of the ocean and my preference for understated elegance. Carmen had outdone herself, creating an atmosphere that was both sophisticated and welcoming. Guests began arriving at 6, a mix of family, friends from work, Jake's colleagues from the Marine Research Station, and longtime family friends who had watched me grow up. My parents were in their element, playing the role of proud hosts, while Derek worked the room with his natural charm. Jake looked handsome but slightly uncomfortable in his formal attire. He was much more at ease in his field clothes than in a suit and tie. Carmen had appointed herself as the unofficial hostess, making sure everyone had drinks, introducing people who didn't know each other, and generally ensuring that the evening ran smoothly. She looked beautiful in a deep purple dress that complemented her dark hair, but I noticed she seemed more tense than usual, her smile a little too bright, her laugh a little too quick. About an hour into the party, as guests were mingling and enjoying the appetizers, I noticed Patricia arrive. She looked stunning as always, wearing a flowing emerald green dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and bohemian. She carried her ever-present camera and a small wrapped gift, and she made her way through the crowd, stopping to chat with relatives she hadn't seen in months. The evening progressed beautifully. Jake and I moved through the room together, accepting congratulations and well wishes, sharing stories about how we'd met and our plans for the future. Dr. Harrison gave a touching speech about watching me grow from a nervous veterinary student into a confident professional, and Jake's research partner shared amusing stories about Jake's dedication to rescuing marine life. It was during dinner that things began to shift. Carmen had arranged for a series of toasts, starting with our parents and moving through various family members and friends. The speeches were warm and funny, filled with childhood memories and predictions for our happy future together. Jake and I were both touched by the outpouring of love and support from everyone who mattered to us. As the formal toasts were winding down, Patricia stood up from her table near the back of the room. She raised her champagne glass and asked for everyone's attention. I smiled, expecting another warm speech about our relationship or perhaps some amusing story from one of her travels that somehow related to love and commitment. Instead, Patricia's voice carried a strange undertone that I couldn't quite identify. She began by congratulating Jake and I, saying all the appropriate things about our relationship and our future together. But then her tone shifted slightly, becoming more personal, more emotional than I'd ever heard from her. "You know," Patricia continued, her eyes scanning the room but somehow avoiding my gaze, "there have been so many disappointments in this family lately, so much sadness and frustration. Carmen and Derek's struggles, the business pressures, the feeling that perhaps our family line might not continue as we'd all hoped." I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't the direction I'd expected her speech to take, and I could see confusion on other faces around the room. Carmen's expression had gone completely still, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Patricia paused, taking a sip of her champagne before continuing. "But tonight, I have an announcement that I think will bring joy to everyone here. After all these years of thinking I'd never experience the joy of motherhood, after telling myself that I was too old, too set in my ways, too focused on my career, I've discovered that life had other plans." The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on her words. I saw my mother lean forward, her face a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "I'm pregnant," Patricia announced, her voice ringing clear across the silent room. "At 52, against all odds, I'm going to be a mother. The baby is due in the spring, and I couldn't be happier about this unexpected blessing." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw shock register on faces around the room, saw my parents exchange glances that I couldn't read, saw Carmen's face go absolutely white. But Patricia wasn't finished. She raised her glass higher, and her next words would echo in my mind for weeks to come. So here's to Vera and Jake and to their future together. And here's to new life, to unexpected blessings, and to finally having some good news in this family. The way she said, finally good news, sent ice through my veins. There was something in her tone, something bitter and pointed, that made it clear this wasn't just an announcement about her pregnancy. This was a statement, a declaration that somehow positioned her news against the rest of the family's struggles, particularly Carmen.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I watched in horror as Carmen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her face had gone from white to a dangerous shade of red, and I could see her hands shaking as she set down her champagne glass. "Excuse me," Carmen said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. She turned and walked quickly toward the exit, leaving Derek scrambling to follow her. The room erupted in confused murmurs as guests tried to process what had just happened. My parents immediately went to Patricia, embracing her and offering congratulations that seemed forced and awkward. Jake reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly as we both tried to understand what had just unfolded. Patricia, seemingly oblivious to the chaos she'd just created, accepted congratulations from various family members and friends. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her announcement than simple joy about her pregnancy. The timing, the phrasing, the pointed reference to finally good news, it all felt calculated in a way that made my stomach turn. I excused myself and followed Carmen outside, finding her in the country club's garden with Derek's arm around her shoulders as she sobbed. When she saw me approaching, she pulled away from Derek and faced me with eyes red from tears and anger. "Did you know?" Carmen demanded. "Did you know about Patricia's pregnancy?" I shook my head, genuinely confused by her reaction. "Of course not. Carmen, I know this might be hard for you, given what you and Derek have been going through, but Patricia's pregnancy doesn't—" "You don't understand," Carmen interrupted, her voice breaking. "You don't understand anything about what's been happening in this family." Derek placed a gentle hand on Carmen's arm. "Maybe we should go home," he suggested quietly. "We can talk about this later, when emotions aren't so high." But Carmen shook her head violently. "No, she needs to know. Vera needs to know what Patricia has been doing, what she's been saying behind our backs for months." I felt a chill of foreboding. "What are you talking about, Carmen?" Carmen took a shuddering breath before continuing. "For the past 6 months, every time we've had a family gathering, every time our fertility struggles have come up, Patricia has made little comments, subtle digs about how we're trying too hard, how maybe it's not meant to be, how the family name might die out with us. And then she started talking about how she might be the only one who could carry on the family line. How ironic it would be if the spinster aunt ended up being the one to give our parents grandchildren." My mouth fell open. I'd never heard Patricia say anything like that. But then again, I hadn't been present for every family conversation over the past months. "And now," Carmen continued, her voice rising, "now she announces her pregnancy at your engagement party, positioning it as finally good news, as if everything else in our family has been a disappointment, as if my struggles, my pain, have been nothing but a burden on everyone." Derek nodded grimly. "She's been making comments about how the family needs new blood, and how perhaps it's time for fresh perspectives on motherhood. It's been subtle, but the message has been clear. Carmen's failures as a woman have been holding the family back." I felt sick. If what Carmen was saying was true, then Patricia's announcement wasn't just poorly timed. It was deliberately cruel, designed to hurt my sister in the most vulnerable way possible. "I had no idea," I said softly. "Carmen, I'm so sorry. If I had known—" "It's not your fault," Carmen said, wiping her eyes. "You were focused on your own life, your own happiness. I didn't want to burden you with family drama when you were planning your wedding." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party continuing inside, seeming surreal against the backdrop of this revelation. Finally, Derek spoke up. "There's something else you should know, Vera. Something we've been keeping quiet because we weren't sure how to handle it." Carmen nodded, taking another deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I saw Patricia coming out of Dr. Morrison's office downtown. You know, the private investigator who helped the Hendersons with their custody case last year. My blood ran cold. A private investigator? Why would Patricia need a private investigator? "That's exactly what we wondered," Derek said. So Carmen did a little investigating of her own. Turns out, Patricia has been asking questions about our family, about the business, about inheritance laws. She hired Morrison to look into the legal implications of family succession, particularly in cases where the designated heir might be unable to fulfill their role. The implications of what they were saying hit me like a physical blow. "You think she's planning to challenge Carmen's inheritance of the business?" "We think she's been planning this for months," Carmen said. "The pregnancy announcement, the timing, the cruel comments about finally good news. It's all part of a larger strategy. She's positioning herself as the only family member capable of carrying on the family legacy, both literally and figuratively." I thought about Patricia's behavior over the past few months, looking for signs I might have missed. Had there been something calculating in her increased involvement in family affairs? Had her supportiveness toward my relationship with Jake been genuine or part of some larger plan? "But why now?" I asked. "Why announce her pregnancy at my engagement party?" Derek and Carmen exchanged a look that suggested they'd already discussed this question. "Maximum impact," Derek said grimly. "Everyone who matters to the family was here tonight. By making the announcement at your party, she accomplished several things at once. She stole focus from your celebration, she hurt Carmen in the most public way possible, and she established herself as the bearer of good news for the family." Carmen nodded. "Plus, she knows that anything that happens at your engagement party will be remembered and talked about for months. She's ensured that her pregnancy announcement will be linked to this happy occasion in everyone's minds, making it harder for anyone to criticize the timing or the method." As we talked, I became increasingly aware of how naive I'd been about the dynamics in my own family. I'd seen Patricia as the adventurous aunt who brought excitement and worldliness to our conservative small-town life. I'd never considered that her outsider status might breed resentment, or that her childless state might be a source of pain that could turn into something darker. "What are you going to do?" I asked Carmen. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Derek and I have been consulting with our own lawyer, trying to understand our options. The business inheritance isn't set in stone. Our parents could change their minds if they wanted to."
And if Patricia is pregnant, if she's planning to position herself as the family's future, then… She didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood the implications. Jake appeared in the garden, looking concerned. "Is everything okay out here? People are starting to ask questions inside." I looked at my sister, seeing her pain and anger and fear all mixed together on her face. Then I looked at Derek, whose loyalty to Carmen was absolute, but whose worry about their future was evident. Finally, I looked at Jake, the man I was going to marry, who had been inadvertently pulled into a family drama that was far more complex and dangerous than any of us had realized. "We need to go back inside," I said finally. "We need to finish this party and act like everything is normal. But tomorrow, we're going to figure out exactly what Patricia is up to and what we're going to do about it." Carmen nodded, wiping her eyes one final time. "You're right. I won't let her ruin your engagement party any more than she already has." As we walked back toward the country club, I couldn't help but think about how much had changed in the space of a single evening. This morning, I'd been a happy bride-to-be, looking forward to celebrating with my family. Now, I was wondering if I really knew my family at all, and whether the woman I'd always admired as my free-spirited aunt was actually something much more calculating and cruel. The remainder of the engagement party passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversations. Patricia continued to accept congratulations on her pregnancy, seemingly oblivious to the tension her announcement had created. My parents were clearly struggling to process the news, trying to be supportive while also being aware of Carmen's pain. Various guests approached me with confused looks, obviously sensing that something had gone wrong, but not understanding exactly what. Jake stayed close to my side throughout the rest of the evening, providing steady support without asking questions he knew I couldn't answer in public. His presence was comforting, a reminder that no matter what happened with my family, I had found someone who would stand by me through whatever came next. As the party finally wound down and guests began to leave, Patricia approached Jake and me for what I assumed would be a final congratulations and goodbye. Instead, she pulled me aside for a private conversation that would prove to be even more disturbing than her public announcement. "Vera, darling," she said, her voice taking on the intimate tone she'd always used when she wanted to share something special with me. "I hope you understand how significant tonight has been, not just for you and Jake, but for our entire family." I forced a smile, not trusting myself to speak. Patricia continued, seemingly interpreting my silence as encouragement. "You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about family legacy, about what we leave behind for future generations. Your parents have built something wonderful with the business, but it requires the right kind of leadership to continue thriving." The implication was clear, and I felt anger rising in my chest. "Carmen has been preparing for years to take over the business, Patricia. She's proven herself more than capable." Patricia's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course she has, dear, but sometimes life has other plans for us. Sometimes what we think is our destiny turns out to be just a detour on the way to what we're really meant to do." "What exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that my pregnancy changes things, Vera. It changes the entire dynamic of our family's future. For the first time in years, we have genuine hope for the continuation of our bloodline. And with that hope comes responsibility. The responsibility to ensure that the family business, the family name, the family legacy are all protected for the next generation." I stared at her, finally seeing clearly the calculation behind her bohemian facade. "You're talking about challenging Carmen's inheritance?" Patricia laughed, but it was a sound without warmth. "I'm talking about being realistic about what's best for the family. Carmen and Derek have been trying to have children for years without success. Meanwhile, I'm carrying the future of our family line. Don't you think the business should go to the person who's actually capable of providing heirs to carry it forward?" The casual cruelty of her words took my breath away. "Carmen's worth isn't determined by her ability to have children, Patricia, and neither is her right to inherit what she's worked for her entire adult life." "Oh, sweetheart," Patricia said, reaching out to pat my arm in a gesture that felt more threatening than comforting. "You're still so young, so idealistic. You don't understand how the world really works. Bloodlines matter, legacy matter, and right now, I'm the only one in this family who's actually contributing to our future." Before I could respond, she continued, "I hope you'll remember that when the time comes to make decisions about the family's future. Your loyalty shouldn't blind, dear. It should be smart." With that, she kissed my cheek, congratulated Jake one final time, and swept out of the country club, leaving me standing there with a growing understanding that my family was about to be torn apart by forces I was only beginning to comprehend. As Jake and I drove home that night, I filled him in on everything Carmen had told me and everything Patricia had just revealed. Jake listened in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he processed the implications of what I was telling him. "So, let me get this straight," he said when I'd finished. "Your aunt announces her pregnancy at our engagement party, positions it as the first good news the family has had in a long time, and then basically threatens to challenge your sister's inheritance because she thinks being pregnant makes her more valuable to the family legacy?" "That's exactly right." Jake pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but neither of us made any move to get out of the car.
We sat in the darkness, both trying to process how our celebration had turned into something so ugly. "What are you going to do?" Jake asked finally. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I know I can't let Patricia destroy Carmen, and I won't let her use her pregnancy as a weapon against my sister." Jake reached over and took my hand. "Whatever you decide to do, I'm with you. This is your family, which means it's going to be my family too. We'll figure this out together." As we finally went inside our small house, I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's announcement was just the beginning of something much larger and more destructive. The way she'd spoken about bloodlines and legacy, the calculated timing of her revelation, the cruel positioning of her news as finally good news, it all suggested a level of planning and manipulation that went far beyond a simple pregnancy announcement gone wrong. Over the next few days, as thank you notes from the engagement party arrived and friends called to discuss the evening's events, it became clear that Patricia's announcement had accomplished exactly what she'd intended. Everyone who had been there was talking about her pregnancy, speculating about her plans, and wondering what it meant for the family's future. The focus had shifted completely away from Jake's and my engagement to Patricia's unexpected news. But more disturbing were the subtle questions that began to emerge.
Several family friends mentioned how interesting it was that Patricia was finally settling down and starting a family. Others commented on how fortunate it was that someone in our family was finally able to carry on the bloodline. The implications were clear. Patricia's pregnancy was being positioned as the family's salvation, while Carmen's struggles were being framed as a disappointment that had finally been resolved by someone more capable. It was exactly the narrative Patricia had wanted to create, and it was working perfectly. Carmen, meanwhile, was struggling with a combination of grief, anger, and fear that was painful to watch. She'd thrown herself even more deeply into work, staying at the office until late at night and coming in on weekends, as if she could somehow prove her worth through sheer dedication. But I could see the toll it was taking on her, and I knew that something had to be done before Patricia's manipulations destroyed my sister completely. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harrison, my mentor at the animal clinic, had been at the engagement party and had witnessed Patricia's announcement. He'd seemed troubled by the evening's events, but hadn't said anything specific until nearly a week later, when he asked me to stay after work for a private conversation. "Vera," he said, his voice careful and measured, "I've been thinking about your engagement party, about your aunt's announcement." I looked up from the medical chart I'd been reviewing. "What about it?" "Well, it's probably nothing, but something about the timing struck me as odd. You see, I've been Patricia's physician for the past 3 years, ever since she moved back to town permanently. And based on what I know about her medical history, her pregnancy announcement raised some questions for me." My heart began to race. What kind of questions? Dr. Harrison hesitated, clearly struggling with patient confidentiality concerns. "I can't share specific medical information, you understand, but I can tell you that if I were you, I might want to verify certain claims before accepting them at face value." "Are you saying you don't think Patricia's actually pregnant?" "I'm saying that medical claims should always be verified by medical professionals," he said carefully, "and that sometimes when people are desperate to achieve certain goals, they might exaggerate their circumstances." The implication hit me like a thunderbolt. If Patricia wasn't actually pregnant, if her entire announcement had been a fabrication designed to manipulate the family dynamics, then everything she'd said about bloodlines and legacy and finally good news took on an even more sinister cast. "Dr. Harrison," I said slowly, "if someone were to fake a pregnancy announcement, how long could they realistically maintain the deception?" "That would depend on several factors," he replied, "that given the right circumstances, someone could potentially maintain such a deception for several months, especially if they weren't subjected to medical verification." I thanked him and left the clinic with my mind racing. If Patricia wasn't actually pregnant, then her announcement wasn't just cruel, it was fraudulent. And if it was fraudulent, then there might be legal implications for her attempts to position herself as the family's heir apparent. That evening, I called Carmen and Derek and asked them to meet me at my house. When I shared Dr. Harrison's concerns, Carmen's reaction was immediate and intense. "I knew it," she said, pacing around my living room. "I knew something was wrong about this whole thing. The timing, the way she's been acting, the calculated cruelty of her announcement, none of it felt genuine." Derek was more cautious. "But how can we prove it? We can't exactly demand that she submit to a pregnancy test." "Actually," I said, "we might not have to. If Patricia is faking her pregnancy, she's going to have to maintain the deception for months. That means doctor's appointments, medical records, physical changes. There will be evidence, one way or another." Carmen stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, determined, focused, and slightly frightening. "Then we need to start gathering that evidence, because if Patricia is lying about this, if she's using a fake pregnancy to try to steal my inheritance and destroy my marriage, then she's going to pay for it." The next few weeks became a careful investigation into Patricia's claims. We had to be subtle, gathering information without arousing suspicion, building a case while maintaining the facade of family unity. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, but it was also revealing in ways I hadn't expected. We discovered that Patricia had indeed been visiting Dr. Morrison, the private investigator, and that her inquiries had been far more extensive than we'd initially realized. She hadn't just been researching inheritance laws, she'd been investigating Carmen and Derek's marriage, looking for any potential vulnerabilities that might further strengthen her position. She'd also been subtly cultivating relationships with key family friends and business associates, positioning herself as a stabilizing presence in the family during a time of uncertainty. More disturbing was the discovery that Patricia had been having regular conversations with our parents about the future of the business, conversations that Carmen hadn't been included in. She'd been planting seeds of doubt about Carmen's leadership capabilities, suggesting that the stress of infertility treatments was affecting her judgment and her ability to make sound business decisions. It was a comprehensive campaign of manipulation and sabotage, far more sophisticated than any of us had initially realized. Patricia hadn't just made a cruel announcement at my engagement party, she'd been systematically working to undermine Carmen's position in the family for months, and the pregnancy claim was simply the culmination of a much larger strategy. The question now was what we were going to do about it, and how we were going to prove that Patricia's pregnancy was as fake as her concern for the family's welfare. Because if we were wrong, if she was actually pregnant and we accused her of lying, the family would never recover from the fallout. But if we were right, if Patricia was indeed perpetrating an elaborate deception designed to steal my sister's birthright and destroy her emotionally, then we had to find a way to expose her before she succeeded in tearing our family apart completely. The truth, when it finally emerged, would prove to be even more shocking than any of us had imagined. The breakthrough in our investigation came from the most unlikely source imaginable. Jake's colleague at the Marine Research Station, Dr. Rebecca Chen, had been at our engagement party and had struck up a conversation with Patricia. Rebecca was a worldly woman herself, having spent years conducting research in remote locations, and she'd been genuinely interested in Patricia's photography work and international experiences. What Rebecca told me 3 weeks after the party changed everything we thought we knew about Patricia's situation. We were having lunch at the Harbor Cafe, where Jake and I often met during our work breaks, when Rebecca casually mentioned something that made my blood freeze. "You know, I've been meaning to ask you about your aunt," Rebecca said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "The photographer with all the travel stories, Patricia, right?" I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral, despite the anxiety that immediately gripped me whenever Patricia's name came up these days. "Well, I found her stories fascinating, especially her recent work in South America. She mentioned spending several months in remote villages along the Amazon, documenting indigenous communities. It sounded like incredibly challenging work, both physically and emotionally." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Recent work? When did she say this was? Oh, she was quite specific about the timeline.
She said she'd just returned from a 4-month expedition that ended in late August. Apparently, she'd been living in conditions with no modern medical facilities, no reliable communication with the outside world. She showed me some photographs on her phone. Absolutely stunning work, by the way. The kind of images that could only come from someone who'd been completely immersed in that environment for months. I felt the world tilt slightly around me. Patricia had announced her pregnancy at our October engagement party, claiming to be several months along. But if she'd been in remote South America until late August, living in conditions with no modern medical facilities, then her timeline didn't make sense.
Either she'd been pregnant during an extremely demanding expedition in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, or her pregnancy claims were even more impossible than we'd suspected. Rebecca, I said carefully, are you absolutely certain about those dates? Positive. In fact, she mentioned that she had to cut her expedition slightly short to make it back for your engagement party. She said it was the first family event she'd attended in over a year, and she wouldn't have missed it for the world. Rebecca paused, noticing my expression. Is everything all right, Vera? You look like you've seen a ghost. I excused myself quickly, claiming a work emergency, and called Carmen immediately. When I told her what Rebecca had revealed, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Carmen, are you there? I'm here, she said finally, her voice tight with controlled fury. I'm here, and I'm trying to process the fact that our dear aunt has been lying about absolutely everything. We arranged to meet that evening at Carmen's house, where Derek was waiting with a collection of documents he'd been quietly gathering. The evidence he'd compiled over the past weeks painted a picture of deception that was far more extensive than any of us had realized. I've been tracking Patricia's financial records, Derek said, spreading papers across their dining room table. It's amazing what you can discover when you know what to look for and you have connections in the banking industry. He pointed to a series of bank statements and credit card records that told a story completely different from the one Patricia had been presenting to the family. Far from being the successful freelance photographer she claimed to be, Patricia's financial situation was dire. She'd been living off credit cards and loans for the past 2 years, with virtually no income and mounting debts that would soon become impossible to manage. But here's the really interesting part, Derek continued, pointing to a series of large deposits that had appeared in Patricia's account over the past 6 months. These payments came from a shell company that I was able to trace back to Morrison's private investigation firm. Patricia wasn't just hiring Morrison to research our family, she was working for him, providing information about us for some unknown client. Carmen sank into a chair, her face pale. She was spying on us, her own family. It gets worse, Derek said grimly. I was able to get copies of some of Morrison's reports through a contact at his office. Patricia has been providing detailed information about our business operations, our personal relationships, our financial situations. She's been documenting everything about our family for months. I felt sick as the full scope of Patricia's betrayal became clear. But who would pay for that kind of information about our family? Who would care enough about our business to hire a private investigator? Derek and Carmen exchanged a look that suggested they'd already discussed this question. We think it might be related to the Henderson Group, Carmen said quietly. They've been trying to buy out smaller accounting firms along the coast, consolidating the market. Our parents have refused their offers repeatedly, but if they could somehow force a sale or create internal family conflicts that weakened our position, the implications were staggering. Patricia hadn't just been trying to steal Carmen's inheritance through emotional manipulation, she'd been actively working to undermine the entire family business for financial gain. Her pregnancy announcement wasn't just cruel, it was part of a coordinated business espionage operation. There's more, Derek said, pulling out another set of documents. Patricia's been in regular contact with Henderson Group executives. Phone records show multiple calls over the past 4 months. And 3 days after your engagement party, she received a payment of $50,000 from the same shell company that's been funding Morrison's investigation. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, trying to process the magnitude of what Patricia had done. She hadn't just attacked Carmen personally, she'd betrayed our entire family's financial security for money from competitors who wanted to destroy our parents' life work. We have to tell Mom and Dad, I said finally. They need to know what she's been doing. Carmen shook her head. Not yet. We need more proof about the pregnancy deception first. If we go to them with accusations about business espionage, but we can't definitively prove that the pregnancy is fake, she'll be able to position herself as the victim of jealous siblings who are trying to discredit her out of spite. She was right, but I was running out of patience with our careful investigation. Every day that Patricia's deception continued was another day that she was damaging our family and potentially our parents' business. The solution came from Jake, who had been listening to our conversation with increasing concern. As a scientist, he was accustomed to approaching problems methodically, gathering evidence systematically, and testing hypotheses rigorously.
What if we create a situation where Patricia has to prove her pregnancy, he suggested, not in a confrontational way, but through circumstances that would naturally require medical verification. Carmen looked up with interest. What do you mean? Well, think about it. If Patricia is really pregnant, especially at her age, she should be under regular medical care. High-risk pregnancies require frequent monitoring, specialized tests, dietary restrictions, activity limitations. If we can create situations that would naturally involve those medical requirements, her responses will tell us everything we need to know. Derek nodded slowly, like organizing family activities that would be inappropriate for pregnant women, or asking about her doctor's recommendations, or offering to help with pregnancy-related tasks. Exactly. And if she's not actually pregnant, she'll either have to decline activities she should be avoiding, which will seem suspicious, or participate in things that would be dangerous for a pregnant woman, which will prove she's lying. It was a clever approach, and over the next 2 weeks, we began implementing Jake's strategy. Carmen organized a family wine tasting at her house, complete with rare vintages and extensive pairings. Patricia attended and enthusiastically participated, drinking multiple glasses of wine without any apparent concern about her supposed pregnancy. I invited Patricia to help me with a veterinary emergency that required lifting heavy equipment and working with chemical disinfectants that would be dangerous for pregnant women. She jumped in without hesitation, showing no awareness of any potential risks to her unborn child. Most tellingly, when my mother mentioned wanting to throw Patricia a baby shower and asked about her due date and doctor's recommendations, Patricia became evasive and kept changing details about her medical care. She claimed to be seeing a specialist in the city, but when pressed for specifics so that gifts could be appropriate for her needs, she provided information that didn't match any real medical practices in the area. But the final proof came from an unexpected encounter that none of us could have planned. Jake and I were having dinner at a restaurant in the next town over when we spotted Patricia at a corner table with a man we didn't recognize. They were engaged in what appeared to be an intense business discussion, with papers spread between them and Patricia taking notes as the man spoke.
Jake discreetly took photos with his phone while I tried to get a better look at the man without being noticed. He was well-dressed, probably in his 50s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested corporate success. More importantly, Patricia's body language with him was completely different from the bohemian free spirit persona she presented to our family. She was professional, focused, clearly discussing business matters of significant importance. When they concluded their meeting, Patricia handed the man a thick envelope and received what appeared to be a check in return. The transaction had all the hallmarks of a business deal being finalized, not a casual dinner between friends. Jake and I followed the man to the parking lot, where we were able to get his license plate number. Derek's banking contacts helped us identify him as Richard Henderson, Senior Vice President of Henderson Group's Acquisitions Division, the same company that had been trying to buy out our parents' business, the same company that had been funding Patricia's espionage activities through Morrison's investigation firm. Armed with this evidence, we finally had proof not just of Patricia's deception, but of her active betrayal of our family's interests. She wasn't just lying about being pregnant, she was actively working to destroy our parents' business while pretending to care about family legacy and bloodlines. But before we could confront her, Patricia made a move that caught all of us off guard and revealed just how far she was willing to go to achieve her goals. It started with a phone call from my mother on a Thursday morning. She was crying, barely coherent, asking me to come to the house immediately because something terrible had happened. I found her in the living room with my father, both of them looking devastated and confused. Patricia collapsed last night, my mother explained through her tears. She called us around midnight, said she was having severe abdominal pain and bleeding. We rushed her to the hospital and they said she lost the baby. My heart sank as I realized what Patricia had done. Faced with increasing scrutiny about her pregnancy claims and knowing that her deception couldn't be maintained much longer, she'd staged a miscarriage to gain sympathy and deflect suspicion. The doctors want to keep her for observation, my father added, his voice heavy with grief. She's asking for the family to come see her, to support her through this difficult time. I looked at my parents, seeing their genuine pain and confusion, and knew that Patricia's manipulation had reached a new level of cruelty.
She wasn't just lying to achieve her financial goals, she was exploiting their love and concern, using their grief as a weapon against their own children. Carmen arrived at our parents' house shortly after I did, and I could see in her eyes that she'd reached the same conclusion I had. Patricia's supposed miscarriage was the final piece of her deception, designed to make her seem like a victim while positioning her as someone who deserved the family's protection and support. "We need to go to the hospital," Carmen said quietly. "We need to be there for Mom and Dad, and we need to see exactly how far Patricia is willing to take this charade." The scene at the hospital was exactly what I'd expected, and somehow worse than I'd feared. Patricia was in a private room, pale and dramatic, surrounded by flowers and cards from family friends who had heard about her loss. She was playing the role of the grieving almost mother perfectly, accepting condolences with brave smiles and talking about how difficult it was to lose the chance at motherhood she'd waited so long to experience. My parents were hovering around her bed, bringing her water and adjusting her pillows, their faces etched with concern for their sister-in-law's well-being. Various family members had come to pay their respects, all of them offering support and sympathy for Patricia's tragic situation. It was a masterful performance, and watching it made me physically ill. Patricia was using our family's love and compassion against them, exploiting their desire to support her through what they believed was a genuine tragedy. But there were details that didn't make sense to anyone with medical knowledge. Patricia's supposed miscarriage had occurred at what she claimed was 4 months into her pregnancy, but there were no medical records of prenatal care, no ultrasound images, no evidence of the regular monitoring that would be standard for a high-risk pregnancy in a woman her age. When I quietly asked one of the nurses about Patricia's condition, I was told that she'd been brought in with abdominal pain that had resolved quickly with basic pain medication. There was no evidence of pregnancy loss because there was no evidence there had ever been a pregnancy to lose. Patricia had essentially staged a medical emergency to create the appearance of a miscarriage, gambling that our family's emotional reaction would prevent anyone from asking too many detailed questions about the medical specifics. Carmen, who had been watching Patricia's performance with barely controlled rage, finally reached her breaking point. During a moment when our parents had stepped out to get coffee, she moved closer to Patricia's bed and spoke in a voice low enough that only Patricia, Derek, Jake, and I could hear. "How long did you think you could keep this up?" Carmen asked quietly. "The fake pregnancy, the business espionage, the lies about your travels and your financial situation? Did you really think we wouldn't figure out what you've been doing?" Patricia's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. The vulnerable, grieving woman disappeared for just a moment, replaced by someone calculating and cold. "I don't know what you're talking about, Carmen," Patricia said, her voice maintaining the weak, pained tone she'd been using all day. "I just lost my baby, and you're accusing me of what exactly?" "We know about Henderson Group," Derek said quietly. "We know about the payments, the meetings with Richard Henderson, the information you've been providing about our family's business. We know about Morrison and the investigation you've been funding." Patricia's mask slipped completely for just an instant, revealing a flash of panic before she regained her composure. "You're upset," she said, still maintaining her victim persona. "You're looking for someone to blame for your own problems, and you've decided to target me because I represent the family future you can't provide." Carmen's hands clenched into fists. "We know you were never pregnant, Patricia. We have proof that you were in South America during the time when you would have conceived. We have evidence of your financial situation, your business relationships with our competitors, your systematic betrayal of our family trust." "Prove it," Patricia said, and for a moment her voice carried a challenge that was completely at odds with her supposed grief and weakness. "Prove any of it. Because all I see are bitter siblings who can't handle the fact that I was finally going to give this family what they couldn't." The arrival of our parents cut off the conversation before it could escalate further, but the battle lines had been drawn. Patricia knew that we knew about her deception, and we knew that she was prepared to maintain her lies even in the face of direct confrontation. Over the next few days, as Patricia recovered from her staged medical emergency, she began implementing what appeared to be a final phase of her plan. She started having emotional conversations with our parents about her grief, about her fears that Carmen and Derek resented her for being pregnant when they couldn't conceive, about her concerns that the family was becoming divided and hostile. She positioned herself as a peacemaker trying to heal family rifts, while subtly suggesting that Carmen's desperation for children had made her paranoid and suspicious of anyone else's happiness. She talked about wanting to honor her lost baby by helping to ensure the family business remained strong and united, even if that meant making difficult decisions about leadership and succession. It was a brilliant strategy designed to turn our evidence of her deception into proof of our instability and jealousy. Every accusation we made could be reframed as the desperate attacks of siblings who couldn't bear to see her succeed where they had failed. But Patricia had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She had underestimated the depth of our determination to protect our family, and she had failed to account for the possibility that her victims might be willing to take extreme measures to expose her deception. The confrontation that would finally reveal the truth came exactly 1 week after Patricia's supposed miscarriage, at a family dinner my parents had organized to help everyone heal and move forward together. Patricia had insisted on cooking, claiming that staying busy was helping her cope with her grief, and she'd spent the afternoon preparing an elaborate meal for the extended family. Carmen, Derek, Jake, and I arrived with our own plan, one that we'd spent days carefully coordinating. We had copies of all the evidence we'd gathered, the financial records, the travel documentation, the photographs of Patricia meeting with Henderson Group executives, the testimony from Rebecca about Patricia's South American expedition. But more importantly, we had arranged for 2 additional guests to attend dinner, guests whose presence would make Patricia's continued deception impossible to maintain. The first was Dr. Harrison, who had agreed to attend as a family friend and medical professional who could speak knowledgeably about pregnancy and miscarriage should the topic arise naturally in conversation. The second was Richard Henderson himself, who Derek had contacted directly using information from their previous meeting. Derek had told Henderson that Patricia wanted to finalize their business arrangement and had suggested he attend our family dinner to meet the people whose business he was trying to acquire. Henderson had agreed, apparently eager to meet our parents and assess the family dynamics firsthand.
He had no idea that his presence would expose Patricia's double life and reveal the full extent of her betrayal to the very family she'd been manipulating. As we gathered around the dinner table that evening, with Patricia playing the gracious hostess despite her supposed recent tragedy, I felt like we were all actors in a play whose final act was about to begin. The truth was finally going to come out, and the family dynamics that Patricia had spent months trying to manipulate were about to be permanently altered by the revelations that were coming. Patricia had gambled everything on her ability to deceive and manipulate the people who loved her most. In just a few hours, we would all discover whether her calculated cruelty would be rewarded with success or whether the truth would finally destroy the elaborate web of lies she'd spent so much time and effort constructing. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, and Patricia went to answer it with the same gracious smile she'd been wearing all evening. But when she opened the door and saw Richard Henderson standing on our parents' doorstep, the expression on her face revealed everything our family needed to know about who Patricia really was and what she'd really been doing to all of us. The silence that followed Richard Henderson's arrival stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Patricia's face had gone completely white, her carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. Henderson, oblivious to the family drama he'd walked into, smiled pleasantly and extended his hand toward Patricia. "Miss Patricia, I presume? Richard Henderson, from Henderson Group. Thank you so much for inviting me to meet your family. I'm looking forward to discussing our business arrangement in a more personal setting." My parents, who had been approaching the door to greet what they assumed was another family friend coming to offer condolences, stopped dead in their tracks. My father's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as he recognized the name Henderson Group, the same company that had been pressuring them to sell their business for months. "I'm sorry," my mother said slowly, "but I think there's been some mistake. We weren't expecting anyone from Henderson Group." Henderson looked puzzled, glancing between Patricia and my parents. "No mistake, I assure you.
Patricia contacted my office earlier this week to arrange this meeting. She said the family was ready to discuss the acquisition terms we've been proposing. The words hung in the air like a physical presence, heavy with implication. Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she struggled to find an explanation that could possibly make sense of Henderson's presence at our family dinner. Carmen stepped forward, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. "Mr. Henderson, I think you should come inside. There are some things about Patricia's business relationship with your company that our parents need to understand." As Henderson entered our childhood home, completely unaware that he was about to become the catalyst for exposing months of deception and betrayal, I saw Patricia's shoulders slump in defeat. She knew the game was over, but I could already see her calculating her next move, planning how to minimize the damage and salvage what she could from the wreckage of her schemes. My parents led Henderson into the living room, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion, anger, and growing realization. Derek had quietly positioned himself near the entrance, ensuring that Patricia couldn't leave without making her situation look even worse. Jake stood near me, providing silent support as we prepared to witness the complete unraveling of Patricia's elaborate deception. "Mr. Henderson," my father said, his voice carefully controlled, "perhaps you could explain exactly what business arrangement you believe you have with our family." Henderson, clearly sensing tension but not understanding its source, pulled out a leather portfolio and opened it on the coffee table. "Certainly, over the past 6 months, Patricia has been providing us with detailed information about your business operations, financial situation, and family dynamics. This intelligence has been invaluable in helping us structure an acquisition offer that addresses your specific concerns and circumstances." He pulled out a thick document and placed it in front of my parents. In fact, Patricia has been instrumental in suggesting terms that would allow her to serve as a liaison between Henderson Group and the original family ownership. Given her understanding of both your values and our corporate objectives, we see her as an ideal bridge between the old structure and the new one. Carmen's voice cut through the shocked silence. "Show them the payments, Mr. Henderson. Tell my parents how much money you've been paying Patricia for this intelligence about our family." Henderson looked uncomfortable for the first time since his arrival. "Well, Patricia has been compensated for her consulting services, yes. Standard industry practice for business intelligence of this quality and scope." "How much?" my father demanded, his voice rising. "Over the past 6 months, approximately $200,000, with a bonus structure tied to successful completion of the acquisition." The number hit our family like a physical blow. Patricia had been paid more than most people earned in 3 years, all for betraying the family that had loved and trusted her. The magnitude of her deception was staggering, not just in its cruelty, but in its calculated professionalism. Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out weak and defensive. "It's not what you think. I was trying to help the family, trying to ensure that if the sale happened anyway, we would get the best possible terms." "By lying to us for months?" my mother asked, tears streaming down her face. "By pretending to be pregnant? By making Carmen feel like a failure? By positioning yourself as the family's salvation while you were secretly working to destroy everything we built?" "I never lied about being pregnant," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Harrison, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "Actually, Patricia, I think we need to address that claim directly. As your former physician, I feel obligated to clarify some medical facts for your family." Patricia's eyes widened in panic as she realized that her medical deception was about to be exposed as thoroughly as her business betrayal. "The medical records show that Patricia has never been pregnant," Dr. Harrison said gently but firmly. "Not recently, not ever. The supposed miscarriage she experienced last week was actually a case of mild food poisoning that resolved with basic supportive care. There was no pregnancy to lose because there was never a pregnancy to begin with." The room erupted in shocked voices as family members tried to process this additional layer of deception. Patricia had not only betrayed their business trust and manipulated their emotions, she had fabricated an entire pregnancy, complete with a staged miscarriage, purely to gain sympathy and deflect suspicion from her other lies. My father stood up slowly, his face red with anger and hurt. "Get out," he said quietly. Patricia looked up at him with tears in her eyes, but they seemed calculated rather than genuine. "Marcus, please, let me explain." "Get out," he roared, louder than I'd ever heard him speak. "Get out of my house, get out of our lives, and don't ever contact this family again." "You can't just cut me off," Patricia said. "I'm family. I'm Elena's sister."
You can't just. You stopped being family the moment you decided to sell us out for money, my mother said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. You used our love against us. You hurt our daughter. You lied about being pregnant to manipulate our emotions, and you conspired with strangers to destroy everything we've worked for our entire lives. Henderson, who had been watching this family drama unfold with growing alarm, quietly began packing up his documents. "I think I should go," he said awkwardly. "Clearly there are family matters to resolve here." "Actually, Mr. Henderson," Carmen said, her voice taking on the professional tone she used for business negotiations, "I think you should stay for just a few more minutes, because now that we understand the source of your information about our family, we need to discuss what happens next." Henderson paused, his business instincts apparently overriding his desire to escape the emotional chaos. "The information Patricia provided to you was obtained through deception and betrayal," Derek added. "She had no authority to represent our family's interests, no legitimate access to our confidential business information, and no right to negotiate on our behalf. Furthermore," Carmen continued, "Patricia's relationship with your company represents a clear conflict of interest that calls into question every piece of intelligence she provided. How do you know that any of the information she gave you was accurate? How do you know she wasn't manipulating data to serve her own financial interests rather than giving you genuine insights into our business?" Henderson's expression shifted as he began to understand the implications of what Carmen was saying. If Patricia had been deceiving her own family for months, how could Henderson Group trust that she'd been honest with them? If she was capable of fabricating a pregnancy and staging a miscarriage to manipulate her relatives, what else might she have fabricated in her business reports? "I think we need to reconsider our entire approach to this acquisition," Henderson said slowly. "If our primary intelligence source has been compromised, then we may not have an accurate understanding of your business situation at all." "That's exactly right," my father said, his anger giving way to shrewd business thinking. "And given that your company has been basing its acquisition strategy on fraudulent information obtained through family betrayal, I think we need to discuss what kind of legal liability Henderson Group might be facing." The color drained from Henderson's face as he realized the potential legal implications of their relationship with Patricia. Corporate espionage, use of fraudulently obtained information, conspiracy to acquire a business through deceptive practices. The list of potential charges was extensive and damaging. Patricia, meanwhile, had been watching this conversation with growing panic. Not only was her family cutting her off completely, but her business relationship with Henderson Group was collapsing as well. The money she'd been counting on, the future she'd been planning, the elaborate scheme she'd constructed, all of it was crashing down around her. "You can't do this," she said desperately. "I have contracts with Henderson Group. I have legal rights to that money." Henderson shook his head. "Any contracts we might have are voided by the fraudulent nature of the information you provided. In fact, we'll likely be seeking to recover the payments we've already made, given the questionable legality of your intelligence gathering methods." The final blow came from Derek, who had been quietly making phone calls during the confrontation. "Patricia, you might want to know that I've been in touch with the district attorney's office. They're very interested in your business relationship with Henderson Group, particularly the payments you received for confidential family information that you obtained through deception. They're also interested in your fake pregnancy claim," Carmen added. "Apparently, using false medical claims to manipulate family members in connection with business fraud adds several additional charges to the potential case against you." Patricia looked around the room at the faces of people who had once loved her, seeing only anger, disappointment, and disgust. Her elaborate scheme had not only failed, it had destroyed every relationship she'd ever valued, and potentially landed her in serious legal trouble. "I need a lawyer," she said finally.
the last vestige of her victim persona finally falling away. "Yes, you do," my father agreed, "and you need to leave our house immediately before I decide to press additional charges for trespassing." As Patricia gathered her things and prepared to leave, she made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her deception. "This won't end here," she said, her voice taking on a threatening tone. "I know things about this family, about your business, that could still cause problems for you. Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement." "Are you seriously trying to blackmail us?" Jake asked incredulously. "After everything you've done, you're actually threatening us?" "I'm offering a solution," Patricia said, "a way for everyone to walk away from this without more damage." Carmen laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "Patricia, you have nothing left to bargain with. Your lies have been exposed, your business partners have abandoned you, and your own family wants nothing to do with you. What exactly do you think you can threaten us with?" Patricia's final facade crumbled as she realized that her power over our family had been completely broken. The fear, guilt, and manipulation she'd used as weapons had been turned against her, and she was left with nothing but the consequences of her own choices. As she walked toward the door for the last time, my mother spoke softly but clearly. "I want you to know that I will never forgive you for this, Patricia. Not for the business betrayal, not for the lies, and especially not for the cruelty you showed to Carmen. You're my sister, but you're not my family anymore." After Patricia left, Henderson quickly concluded his business and departed, making it clear that his company would be withdrawing their acquisition offer and focusing their attention on other opportunities. The threat to our family business that had been looming for months evaporated in a single evening, destroyed by the same deception that was meant to facilitate it. The aftermath of Patricia's exposure brought our family closer together in ways I hadn't expected. My parents, shaken by the realization of how thoroughly they'd been deceived, made a point of having more open communication about business decisions and family matters. Carmen, freed from the psychological pressure of Patricia's manipulation, began to heal from the emotional damage that had been inflicted on her. Most importantly, the crisis had revealed the strength of our family bonds when they were based on honesty and genuine care, rather than manipulation and deception. We'd faced a serious threat to everything we valued, and we'd emerged stronger and more united than before. 3 months later, as Jake and I finally celebrated our wedding in a ceremony free from family drama and hidden agendas, I reflected on how much we'd all learned about trust, loyalty, and the difference between family bonds based on love and those based on convenience or manipulation. Patricia was facing multiple criminal charges related to her business fraud and would likely spend several years in prison. Henderson Group had settled out of court to avoid the negative publicity of a corporate espionage trial. Our family business was stronger than ever, with Carmen having proven herself capable of handling even the most serious threats to our stability and success. As I danced with Jake at our wedding reception, surrounded by family and friends who had supported us through one of the most challenging periods of our lives, I realized that Patricia's cruel announcement at our engagement party had ultimately been a gift, though not in the way she'd intended. Her deception had forced us to examine our family relationships more carefully, to value honesty over politeness, and to recognize the difference between people who truly cared about our well-being and those who were willing to exploit our love for their own gain. The woman who had tried to destroy our family with fake news about finally having something good to celebrate had instead given us the opportunity to discover just how strong our real bonds truly were. And in the end, that was the best wedding gift we could have received. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.